All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Affordable Housing Committee, Ad Hoc Committee. Um, First item of business tonight is a roll call from the committee. I see Miss Nicole Eady, Mr. Jalen Seed, Miss Nicole Ayers, Miss Heather Dunn, and Miss Darlene Young. And we also have in attendance Council President Barbara Smith, who's not on the committee, but obviously is very welcome, and we're happy she's here.
Ms. Ayers just joined. I don't know if you saw her.
Oh, hi, Ms. Ayers. How are you? Great. Okay, next item on the agenda is acceptance of minutes, and then after that, we'll move to public participation. So for the meeting minutes for our meeting of February 20th, did anyone have any corrections, additions, deletions? Okay. Seeing none, I would take a motion to accept the minutes. All right, thank you, Mr. Seed. All in favor of accepting the minutes as submitted? All right, I see everybody. Thank you. Ms. Nick Ayers, are you abstaining?
I am abstaining.
Okay, great. Terrific. Thank you. I think that passes then otherwise. Okay, Michelle, do we have anyone for public participation this evening?
It appears we
Okay.
have one person on from the public. So if you'd like to make a comment, please use the raise your hand feature tool at the bottom of your screen and we'll bring you over to speak. See, another person just logged on as well, so I'll repeat. Tonight, if you'd like to speak at the meeting and you're from the public, please use the raise your hand feature and we'll bring you over to speak to make a comment.
Okay. Doesn't look like we have any hands raised. All right, so seeing no one who's got their hand raised, we'll go ahead and close public participation and move on with our agenda for the evening. So as you all know, we are talking about the city's new affordable housing plan. For folks who are not on economic and community development, the plan did get approved by that committee on Monday. And so now we'll be moving to the Common Council for full approval. But in the meantime, while we are going through that full approval process, we've really gone ahead and gotten the process moving on the items in this plan. And so tonight, just as again as a reminder, and for anyone from the public, last month we spoke about items that were on this on the action matrix for the Affordable Housing Action Plan that were in the purview of the Planning and Zoning Department, and in particular, Michelle, who is our housing coordinator. And this month, we're going to hear from two other entities, the Norwalk Housing Authority and the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency, that the plan assigns some responsibilities to, or some suggested responsibilities to, in terms of some of the action items. And I think that our goal for the evening is to hear from them. I've actually already gotten some feedback from Adam Bolvalski from the Norwalk Housing Authority that he will share with us in terms of some of the items potentially not perhaps being the right items, or the housing authority not perhaps being the right person, but we'll walk through those. I think make some significantly smart updates and adjustments to make sure, again, that we have clarity about who's got responsibility. And also, I think got a couple of recommendations about items that can be streamlined or narrowed in a way to really actually achieve the objectives. And as you all know, our goal is to really be able to figure out what can we move forward in the next year, what are things that are actually achievable. And so I'm going to invite them to speak, and then we have Ms. Eady and others. There's a particular item that we had talked about last month, a very low-hanging fruit around the 80 to 90%, 80% threshold that we're going to talk about after our guest speakers. So again, to show that we are actually really starting to move this forward as rapidly as we can. So Adam, why don't we start with you? If you want to talk about, again, I don't think we need to go in huge depth, but if you, I know, Michelle, if you maybe want to bring up the matrix that we can look at, and Adam, if you want to kind of call out, I think, the places where you see some need to reassign responsibilities, and also the places where I think we talked about some opportunities to really focus the item on something that's achievable and aligned with work that's already happening would be, I think, helpful.
Absolutely. And first, I just want to thank you for inviting me here to speak this evening. All the attention that affordable housing is getting right now is very exciting. I think it's very timely. And so I appreciate all the council members' attention to this issue.
Sorry, and I apologize. Can I just interrupt very briefly to say one thing? Because I'm not sure everyone has seen this, and certainly the public. So one of the really terrific things that Michelle has done for us is she has actually taken these action items and put them into a spreadsheet so that we can actually have some live tracking on what's happening, who's responsible, where there's been progress, where we've had recommendations for tweaks to the item to make it more achievable. And I'm really grateful to her for doing this. And I really hope that the committee will, again, help make sure that this is a living document that we move forward. And so this document is going to reflect, I think, some of Adam's and when we get to him, Stephen's comments on these items so that we are really capturing what we're really setting out to achieve. So I just wanted to explain what it is that you're seeing on the screen, and I'll turn it back over to you, Adam.
Great, thanks. And just some background, there was a version of this document in August that the Housing Authority had done sort of a deep dive on and made a lot of sense. And then a bunch of things have been added to our sort of cachet of responsibility that I just think need to be assessed as to whether the Housing Authority is the right place and whether or not additional funding would be required to get them done. So the first item that I would turn to is on page 5-3, item E2. I'll a moment to get there. So this item is to publish a table on the city's website that shows affordable housing eligibility based on household income at the time of the application. So this was assigned to the Housing Authority previously, and I was just pointing out that we don't have any control over the city of Norwalk's website, and so we're happy to participate in providing information to the city, but we can't control the city's website. And also that the eligibility for our programs is something that's fairly simple. There's a few different programs to include, but the affordable housing eligibility for a lot of the private developers who have the 10% affordable units, that may be a little bit more complicated. Each will have their own sort of calculations and may require a substantial amount of I guess research and or communication with the providers of that housing. So totally a doable item, but probably better for the city to take on. And of course, the Housing Authority is happy to participate and assist in any way we can. The next item I would turn to is item E3, which is publishing an annual housing report to track city spending on affordable housing development and preservation. And I just think this requires perhaps some clarification. The city does a tremendous amount to support affordable housing. They provide us with valuable tax abatements and assisting us with getting our permits through. And but traditionally, the city doesn't provide any operating funds towards affordable housing, and they haven't in some time provided any substantial capital funds towards affordable housing. There used to be a $250,000 set aside per year in the capital budget that would go to the redevelopment agency, and the Housing Authority took advantage of that on many occasions, particularly with Soundview Landing. But it has been quite some time, I think, since the city has put either operating or capital dollars directly into affordable housing. So it's not clear what this would be tracking. It could track tax abatements. It could track other things, but as far as city funding, I think sometimes there's confusion. The Housing Authority is not a part of the city. We're a quasi-federal agency. We're independent. And so tracking the city's spending on funding, there's nothing much to track at this point.
And Steve, let me stop you there because I think, the committee may have questions, but I also wanted to say, we talked about then really transforming this a little bit into an item that is a little bit more comprehensive. And, again, to the purposes this committee has talked about really being appreciative of in the housing, in the affordable housing plan so far is really gathering the data. So really getting a chart of everything federal, state, and local dollars. And as you say, potentially the local dollars is zero, but really having a readable chart that collects all of that information in terms of what all of the funding streams are that support affordable housing, including things like the property tax abatements. So we could have a real comprehensive picture. And I think we talked about maybe that assignment living with Michelle with information gathered from you and from others as appropriate.
Sure, absolutely. And of course, we're always happy to provide any data. All of our audits are public, all the information is there, and we can give whatever specific information is requested. Happy to do that.
Okay. And Michelle, does that jibe with your recollection? And is that a fair assignment of task to you?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. And maybe just on that previous item as well, we had talked about rather than that we had talked about Michelle then potentially coordinating and not necessarily taking the time to get a calculation for every affordable housing unit, but really to help to work with community services and make sure that community services has a comprehensive list of the current contacts at each affordable housing site so that it streamlines the process for people to at least know who to reach out to. So again, I think this is an example of a place where your feedback is helpful to developing a more targeted and more achievable action item that nonetheless is actually very useful for moving this process forward. And Ms. Ayers, that may be one of interest to you as well. I think, the hope is that Michelle would be able to coordinate with the community services department on that.
Can you hear me? I don't.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think that probably would live with the navigators in our community hub. My concern in sitting here and just looking at it, thank you for this document, is that we have constituents and citizens of all different abilities and understanding. And whatever we do, it needs to be tangible for the people that are going to use it. That does not need to be a list. It needs to be something tangible, maybe organized in a way that is easily accessible to people. I do agree with Adam in saying that the public housing should not be the head or facilitating this for multiple reasons. But one of my major reasons is we need to make sure that our definition of affordable is one that includes public housing, but also there's more than just public housing. And so I would encourage, if Michelle does have the capability and the capacity for it to live somewhere within the city and be directly attached to the city's website, as well as have another tangible way for residents to access this information.
That all makes a great deal of sense. And I think, as you said, it seems like a real opportunity for Michelle and Adam and anyone else with the data to really coordinate with the Community Services Hub and the Community Resource Hub and the navigators to, as you say, get them information and they can advise on sort of the most user-friendly way to have that information be made available. So yes, let's leverage our expertise in our different areas. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Volbowski, for letting us sort of tangent on that. Let's move on to the next couple items and anything we need to add there.
Sure. On E4, which is about streamlining the application prospect for prospective workforce housing residents. First, this wouldn't be something that the Housing Authority would be able to take on because we don't deal with most of the landlords who we don't work with most of the landlords who have affordable housing in when those 10% set asides, only our own. But also each of those landlords tends to have their own, software systems and proprietary software that just might make a streamlined application prospect very difficult, because they all may ask slightly different questions. They use slightly different background checks. They all so creating just sort of one system might be difficult. And one of the things that I suggested when we were speaking earlier was that perhaps instead information about how to apply and where to apply and ideally what lists are open. That type of information would probably be more useful, so that folks know where to go and not to waste time going to places that don't have any openings. But one application process is a great idea, but I think would be very difficult to accomplish in reality.
And I can't remember if it was your comment or perhaps it was Mr. Kleppin's comment, that one option to potentially consider is, talking to some of the ownership of some of the workforce housing and seeing if there's some kind of, simple pre-application that gathered very basic data that could allow people to very easily assess whether the wait list is open for units that they qualify and where to then spend their time on a further application. So I think that this has been now redirected to planning and zoning, since it really, as you say, the workforce housing really sits with them. And that's for, a good, I think, follow-up conversation as to whether there's a mechanism that could make the process better, even if we can't sort of fully reduce it to one application.
Yeah, absolutely. The next comment I would have is on page 5-5, item C3, which is providing homeownership counseling and educational programs. So there's a system that currently supported by HUD, that is of HUD approved housing counselors, and specifically we talk about BNT in Bridgeport, the building neighborhoods together, and HDF in Stamford, the Housing Development Fund. That those agencies are HUD approved counselors. Their classes are free. They have access to certain resources. And that's really where we refer everyone. And I do wish there was a place in Norwalk to do that. But again, they are already set up and funded to do this work. And I was regaling stories. I don't know if you guys remember Barbara Hudgens, who used to run the Food, Fuel, and Shelter collaboration. And she did a whole bunch of research on behalf of the NAACP a number of years ago, and trying to come up with a sort of a comprehensive way of explaining to folks how to buy a house. And in the end, she realized people just needed to be referred to HDF or BNT. So my recommendation would be just comprehensively getting the word out there that for first-time home buyers, that those are two locations that they should be reaching out to.
Yeah, and that's, I think, seems like terrific advice, particularly given our limited current dollars on this. If there are existing organizations that are doing really good work, as you say, really focusing our efforts on communicating those resources is probably more effective use of our resources. So I think that was very helpful feedback. And I don't know if folks on the committee, does anyone have questions about those organizations? And of course, to be honest, the terrifying possibility that who knows whether HUD approved counselors will be a thing in a year.
There are people with their hands raised.
No, I think Nicole had her hand up before I did.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ayers.
So my concern with this one is, one, we should never be in a position where we're sending our residents outside of the city to get resources for the city. Is there any possible way we can make some connections? I know there is a space in City Hall, and it is under the community service department where different entities are able to have office hours. I have a problem sending our residents to another town to get things that we should give. So maybe we need to communicate with those existing programs to say, hey, can you be in Norwalk one day and provide your services in Norwalk one day, instead of sending our residents outside of the city. Is that possible?
And council member Ayers, I would host that in South Norwalk at our Envision Center if we could work that out. I would be happy to create to allow for some time in the Envision Center on a regular basis for an agency that wanted to provide those services.
I think that's wonderful. And I hope at some point we can update this document to reflect that we want to welcome any organization or entity into the city rather than sending our residents out. Thank you.
Ms. Young?
Yeah, so I kind of figured Ms. Ayers was going to say that because that was the thing I was going to say. There's a swing space. And so there are several organizations that use an office that's set up, and they're on a schedule. But I think you, Adam, offering that at your Envision Center would be ideal. But also there is some benefit too to doing some one-on-one work in that swing space. So it's worth having that conversation with Lamond Daniels as well. I can see you also doing a program, actually doing the work at the Envision Center. But if there's something else that people need, they can always come to the swing space at City Hall if HDF, representative, or you said building one community could have some space in that area. So I think that would be a great asset for the community.
And I'll remind folks also the Open Door Shelter has the Economic Opportunity Hub. I don't think anyone from the shelter's here today, but that's also a great space in South Norwalk for working on folks' financial independence.
So, Miss Andrew, I'm gonna butcher it. As the Polish person, I'm butchering your name, Miss Andrzejewski. Can we add that? Can we update the action item to reach out to those two organizations and see if we can perhaps coordinate their presence in one or more of our spaces? And I think we had also thought about inviting them to the May forum that this committee is sort of working towards, as an opportunity to, introduce residents sort of broadly to the resources in the area. And maybe that's a good ask, is sort of come to the May forum, and then can we develop a more continuous relationship going forward? Ms. Young?
Chair, I know at one point, former council member Diane Revoluz had mentioned something about NACA. Is HDF the equivalent of that type of program? Does anyone know? Or is that something totally different?
I think that is something totally different. Ms. Ayers and I have chatted about that a little bit. They seem to be largely operating in Hartford, and it is on my follow-up list to see if they are interested or able or have capacity to do anything in Fairfield County. I am worried that they are one of the organizations whose funding has currently been kind of topsy-turvied by the current administration, but I do think it's worth following up on.
Right.
And just so that the committee know, I did make an appointment to go through their process just to see what it was. And it's in Manchester, but it was the one time it snowed. So I dare not venture out to Manchester. The one time it snowed, and just my schedule, I did not reschedule. But from my knowledge and speaking with them, they may not be as affected as we think. So it would be a good thing, Chair, if you could make that connection to see if they are interested in Lower Fairfield County.
Yeah, I will follow up. I think I sent an email to a general account, and I think I probably just need to get on the phone and harass somebody. So we will try to gather more information on that. But this is why I have to say, like, I don't know how others are feeling. I'm finding this process of just realizing, like, getting the different parts and pieces of this system into the room in relation to this plan, even in and of itself, has already been helpful in terms of figuring out, like, different people have different knowledge, different people have different senses of, who these entities are. And I think I hope to identify, ways we can make the plan already a little more specific and a little more targeted, as opposed to a generalized, we should do this, and more of a like, okay, these are options, who can be responsible for outreaching there. So, Ms. Dunn?
Yeah, I do end up working with a lot of people who do training about housing with my Red Cross work. And I've done some with the health department. So I think maybe Lamont Daniels might be a good resource too, because he has those community meetings on Friday mornings where a lot of the people get involved. And that might be a place to go and just put the wish list out there of who actually does it. Because I know person to person does. A lot of them do open doors, some kind of support with training and helping people navigate the system. So, and there's a lot of Spanish speaking groups that do as well. I know of about 3 of them. So
Great. That's very helpful because I think having Mr. Daniels and maybe Anna Vivian come to one of our next meetings to do because there are items under this action plan that were assigned to them, and I think that as we're going through it, we are sort of assigning more to them. So I think they should definitely be one of our next stops to engage and figure out what they're already doing that may or may not be captured here. So okay, Mr. Bobowski, you want to move us through the
Sure. So the next item is on page 5-6, item B3. And that's collaborating with the Connecticut Office of Brownfield Remediation and Development for financing and technical assistance to redevelop Norwalk's 33 brownfields land for future affordable and moderate income development. So I think that I sort of had a lot of questions here. We have absolutely benefited from working with folks, working with brownfields when possible in our developments, but it's usually not coming from the brownfield itself. It's usually we identify a development and it's near or on a brownfield, and then we work through them. So I guess one of my questions would be, are we only looking at the sites owned by the city? Are we looking at the sites that are owned by other individuals? And to do sort of proper research on this work would really require a fair amount of funding for pre-development. Someone to hire the architects, engineers, the lawyers. So we need to learn first, though, who owns the sites, how big are they, what's the zone that they're in, what do we know about the environmental issues, and then once we have that information, we may be able to pick some to try to do some of these developments on. But I think that I heard from redevelopment that they're looking to use GIS to put this information into a more easily identifiable system.
do you want to
coming on? Yeah.
Do you want to jump on, Mr. Ivan, on this point? Because I think this is actually some exciting and interesting news you've got.
Sure, and I apologize for being off camera. I'm in between work and sitting in my car and a little bit disheveled. So, yes, we have a Brownfields GIS map that will come out through our office, hopefully within the next month or 2, where we've had a consultant, put the GIS mapping together based off of previous assessment data and whatever additional information that they've acquired that will list potential brownfield sites or sites that have already been identified as brownfields. So in terms of mapping and plotting out what brownfields properties the city has, and then after that shouldn't be too difficult to figure out what zone they are in. We will be releasing that resource through our office in a little bit. Obviously that'll be shared with the city. We'll post it on our own website and make the resource available through norwalkct.gov as well. So that if people are interested, developers or otherwise, they'll be able to have access to that and see, what is a brownfield and what's not.
Terrific. I think that's really exciting. And I think therefore for now, at least we're going to reassign this item to redevelopment, and then we can kind of revisit it once the mapping is done and see if there's sort of another next step that we want to move forward. But I think that's, I'm really interested to see the results of this study.
Yeah, we're very interested as well. The Housing Authority, that's a very exciting information for us to be able to take a look at as well. So thank you, redevelopment.
Yes, I think that's very good news.
The next item I had was on B5 on the same page, educate community members on the availability of state and local resources to support the development of affordable housing. I think that there certainly are other folks in the affordable housing area. Most of them are actually larger developers who are pretty sophisticated themselves and don't require a lot of information. But to the extent that we'd want to sort of try to help others, the housing authority would need to staff up for that. That would have to be something that we hire for. Of all of my staff, my staff that works on the redevelopments and the new developments is just way under resourced. They do an amazing job, but they do it, they're understaffed as it is. So we'd be happy to consider that. We would just need funding, presumably from the city to hire staff to do that work. And we'd of course happily utilize them for our own work as well. So just as far as what's needed to do that, that's not something we would just take on. That's something we would need to be funded to do, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think part of this exercise is really identifying where are the gaps in capacity. I think you had also flagged, and I think you alluded to a little bit, this item is maybe a little non-specific in terms of who exactly we're trying to reach and educate. And I do think there's an opportunity here to break out, our opportunities to educate residents, opportunities to educate, folks who are interested in maybe doing a duplex or or an ADU or something that they're a smaller sort of developer on. And then there's maybe a sort of different set of questions in relation to the larger developers, more about facilitating and less about educating. So I think those notes are helpful to help us again go through and refine kind of what is our target audience here, where are the gaps in the knowledge base. And I think redevelopment, Mr. Ivins may also have some comments on this. I think there's potential some overlap between their responsibilities and yours, but sounds like everyone feels like they'd need more staff to do this on some kind of larger scale. I don't know, Mr. Ivan, I'm speaking for you, but I think would that be accurate?
Yeah, it ends up being a capacity issue. If we are funded for more, can afford another position, I'm sure Brian's happy to have that talk and conversation. If we're able to, we certainly would look into it. But it would come down to, being financially supported either through staffing or consultant work to be able to expand our reach.
Thank you.
So moving on to item 7 on the page is creating a new low interest or forgivable loan program that provides financial assistance for affordable housing developers. And it goes on. We're not funded for this. It sounds a little bit more like the kinds of things that redevelopment does to us. The helping to build affordable housing, especially for small, 1 to 2 units. It can be very expensive endeavor just to create a couple of units. So it's something that would require us really a substantial amount of resources. And again, it feels a little bit more like what we've done with redevelopment in the past. With CNI, we did renovate and then sell to a low-income family or a moderate income family a duplex. We did that before, but we did do that with redevelopment. And again, it's I think, Stephen, you tell me if it just sounded a little more like redevelopment to me.
It's certainly something that we can participate in as well. I think the agency has had similar issues in the past of, I know at one point they tried to leverage HUD funds to buy, renovate, and resell homes to low to moderate income homeowners that ended up not being sustainable because in order to do the renovations correctly and purchase the houses, and then sell to somebody who within a range that the low to moderate income resident can afford, they ended up taking losses with that through previous administration. So I agree with Adam. I think that doing a 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom house to freshly develop and then also restrict it to low income ends up being difficult for finding the space and availability to do it and the scale to do it compared to a larger development that has 20, 30, 40 or something more attractive to a developer where they can meet their economy of scale and also collect enough rent to maybe make it affordable, or just finance it. We'd be happy to participate in that conversation, though. And we can explore and look for anything that might facilitate the development of more homeowner focused development.
I see Ms. Young and I think Ms. Dunn.
I just had a quick question, or I'd like
I'm
clar-
sorry, I was still on mute. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Steve?
Yep.
Both Steven and Steve. Either one of you. So just while you were talking, I was thinking about, so we purchased the property around the school, right? The new school in South Norwalk.
Mhm.
And what did we do? We had to those houses around we purchased and tore down. Is there enough space possibly or to put up some sort of housing? And is that our property? Right?
I don't know if Steven knows more. I would have to go back and look and see what the status is of those transactions. I don't know if that was ever contemplated as part of the plan. But you've already got a team that's already kind of laying out the site as part of the redevelopment. So that's something that certainly they could look at, I would think.
Yeah, I unfortunately don't have any information for around the school either. It's not something that's been discussed with me, and I'm not sure it's been discussed with the agency because it's been a separate, building management project. So I'm not sure that we've been asked or heard anything about developing residential around the school.
This is me asking that question just based on what you said. So those properties that we had to eminent domain that we own, right?
Yeah,
I
do
mean, that's
recall
part of the
from
land.
right. I do recall from conversations when they were going through the referral process on the purchase of those that they did
Mhm.
indicate that they needed those for circulation, internal
Okay.
circulation, buses and cars, as well as just access to the site. So I don't know if they'd want to put housing back in where they just had taken it out. Just my guess.
So
And,
that
and the other thing
what
is,
they tore down were not houses anymore. Those were things that needed to come down.
but
Go ahead.
also if you take something by eminent domain, it has to be used for the public good. So maybe you can argue that affordable housing for individual families is for the public good, but that might be a more complicated or nuanced argument to make. So that's
Okay.
another challenge. Take things by eminent domain is the purpose for the land after you take it.
Right.
If I can add to Darlene, I can answer that too, just in that I am aware that the plans for the site are already planned. And just to add to what Adam said, my understanding is that, when you do take it by eminent domain, it is for the public good. I believe it has been named, as a part of the school property.
Yeah.
That's fine. It was a thought.
Well, and I do think it's an interesting question to think about for the future, right? As we're redeveloping places, teacherages for our teachers, if we're redeveloping a school, if we're redeveloping the fire station, if we're going to do this big fire station redevelopment, could we do housing for our firefighters that are located on site? I don't know. These are issues that we should
Right.
maybe consider. Ms. Dunn, I think you had a question though as well.
Well, more of a statement question, but from my memory of doing things, redevelopment agencies' scope is not the entire city. It's very targeted areas. Is that still the case?
We have plans, like plan areas where we can, where we have authority in. I do believe that the tip of Wilson over there is under the South Norwalk TOD plan.
Right.
And if it's
In general, though, like if you were talking about moving into helping out with homes, renovating or updating homes, if it's not in your area, in the scope of the area, it would not be under your umbrella, right?
It depends on the source of fund and what we're asking to do. We can certainly help out with things outside of the plan areas, but under like the like design review for instance that we participate in, that is limited to the plan areas where we can either give comment, feedback, or require certain design aspects to be considered or implemented like outside of planning and zoning's own review, where they might not comment on the type of brick or something like that. Like that we cannot do outside of the planned areas unless we approve a separate plan that would or expand a plan that would cover that. But for things like infrastructure grant work to help leverage a development that is outside of a planned area, or general housing rehab, we can step outside of the plans. We're an agent of the city. The stuff that we can require people is limited to our planned areas, but the limit of where we can help is outside of that.
Yeah, the only reason I'm saying that is because, if you were part of, let's say you want to take over part of Cranberry Park and make it a housing unit, it really wouldn't be in your, not that I'm suggesting that,
Right.
but it wouldn't be in your area. So that person probably would not get those supports necessarily. You're very targeted in the areas that have been assigned.
We wouldn't be able to demand or require items on that. Like that would be left to the rest of the city. We could be a third party to it for leveraging the sale of the land. I mean, it's outside of our planned area, but in terms of our ability to help, it extends beyond the planned areas, but our jurisdiction is limited to the plans.
Okay. I think people just don't know that as a rule. That's why I brought it up. Okay.
Yeah,
thanks.
like we can't force things legally as a redevelopment agency, or have the influence that we do without the plans, but we're able to extend other resources outside of the city or outside of the planned areas.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Ayers?
Thank you. This is for someone for redevelopment, and I think it's if I have to put it under an action, it would be the one that's saying provide direct subsidies or down payment assistance to help buyers purchase homes. Every year, I guess now with this year, we're doing it twice a year. The city goes through a tax sale of properties that have liens or something on them. I don't know. I'm going, when I say outside the box, way outside the box. Is it possible that some of those properties that are up for lien can then be taken for affordable housing? Either
Steve?
by dual partnership, either by helping people purchase the land or anything. Steve, I see you shaking your head no already. But
Well, no, I don't think you just are saying no.
the reason why I'm asking this is we're not getting no more land unless somebody got some land that y'all didn't tell us about. Norwalk is not getting any more land, and so we have heard time and time again constituents say they don't want any more apartments. So I'm constantly trying to think how we can take what we already have to try to address some of those issues of affordable housing. Go ahead, Steve.
Steve B? Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, we're actually, I talked to Nora and others about this before. We're actually looking at putting together some draft legislation where we would give the housing authority right of first refusal on those tax properties. That's not allowed currently in the state, but Massachusetts has a law for that. So we're kind of looking at that, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll work that through the mayor's office and council, and then up to Bob Duff's office, and say here's something we think that would be beneficial to the city.
But can you help me understand why would it just be for the Norwalk Housing Authority? Why couldn't it be for another entity to also do that work?
I don't see why it couldn't, assuming it was another kind of qualified entity that does something similar already, yeah, I don't see why it couldn't.
And the reason why I'm asking that question, a year ago, I guess, and maybe Jalen can chime in, we had a public forum about affordable housing, and one of the speakers there, and her name is leaving me, she said about Norwalk needing to look into private, nonprofit, public partnerships to address the public housing, what we call a crisis. And since she has said that, I have like looked it up, researched it, try to figure out how we can collaborate in a way that is really addressing this issue. And that's why I said, could we write it in a way with a wider scope? So it's just not the Norwalk housing, but if there's a collaborative that is, you know, checks all the boxes and we know is credible, could also bid for some of those things. Just a thought. Just a thought.
Makes sense.
And I think that some of the community land trusts that we had a speaker about a couple months ago, I think some of the community land trusts in different states do that, where they have the authority, which again, we don't currently here. Can I just, before we move on, I want to not lose sight of the point though that I think Adam and Steve was making, Steve Ivan were making, that I think is challenging for this committee, right? So as I think Ms. Ayers referenced, we hear a lot of feedback from residents that they don't want more apartment buildings, or they don't want apartment buildings on the scale that some of them have recently been built. At the same time, I think we're hearing from you who actually do this building that the economics don't work for building smaller scale, single family homes. So can you talk to us a little bit more? What are the economics that make that hard? Why is it so expensive to do that? Why is it not, sort of cost effective? What are the barriers to doing that? And are there things that we could do that would work on some of those barriers?
So, I feel like this could be a whole
This could be like a
Discussion
3-hour
in-
seminar. I totally
yeah,
get it. So we're
in and
like,
of itself. So two things. One is to answer that sort of directly. As far as economies of size go, so the main resource we use to build large scale affordable housing are low income housing tax credits, and low income housing tax credits, there's 4% and 9%, but regardless, the once you use these low income housing tax credits, and therefore you get these the federal subsidies that are really coming through, that means that we have to start using prevailing wage, which is a much more expensive way of building a development. And we can't get the per unit cost down to something that even the state would consider, unless we get up to maybe 35 or 40 units. So the main resource that we use really isn't a tool that we can use unless we're at that sort of 35 to 40 plus size development, or just the funding just doesn't work out. The other thing is that for us to hire an architect, hire engineers, hire a lawyer on planning and zoning, hire the general contractor, do the bidding, close on the financing, the amount of work for a 5-unit building is the same as for a 150-unit building. Not exactly, but pretty darn close. So if you're working on lots of sort of mom and pop type 1 or 2 bedroom, 1 or 2 unit buildings, it's just a tremendous amount of staff resources and financing that goes in just to help sort of 1 or 2 families. And so as far as trying to make a dent in the thousands of units that we need here in Norwalk, doing them one at a time, I mean, it could take you years to do 1 or 2 units, with the same amount of work and effort and resources as far as staff goes as it would take you to do 100 unit development. So it's just not an efficient way to operate, if your goal is to make a lot of units affordable to a lot of low to moderate income families. If that makes sense. The other thing I just wanted to I just
No,
want
keep
to
going. I think that's very helpful to get information on. I think that's actually very helpful to understand.
I just wanted to comment on the thing about the first right of refusal. Housing Authority is interested in property wherever we can get property, despite what I just said about, the small developments aren't ideal. Of course, we're interested in that. But I will say that one of the big differences between Norwalk and some other cities is that Norwalk does I think it's called the tax lien sale. Some other cities do foreclose on properties when they are owed substantial taxes for a substantial period of time, and then they just sort of take the property and they usually give it or donate it to a nonprofit like Habitat for Humanity. I know Bridgeport used to do that a lot, which sort of specializes in that type of work of developing one unit, mostly done through a tremendous amount of volunteer work going into and donations going into to make the economics work for their project. So because we do the tax lien sale, we get a tremendously high return rate on our taxes, which is good for the city for lots of reasons. But that's one of the reasons that we don't have the same number of properties that some other cities have, that they then again either donate to nonprofits or do something else with to make them affordable going forward. Does that make sense?
No, that's actually, I think this is all very helpful context. I would also hypothesize that our land values are also one of the barriers. I mean, they're just flat out high. A vacant lot in Norwalk still costs quite a bit of money, which, then you have to build on top of that can be challenging. Mr. Ivan, I think you're off mute. If you've got other things you want to add to this in terms of why it's so costly to do, 1 and 2 family homes.
Yeah, I was just going to add, and I would think that Adam would probably agree, is that you're building this affordable home and it's rent restricted. It is not just that we're making affordable housing, but you're also making affordable, decent housing is the goal, right? It's not to just buy a house, leave it in a bad condition and move people into it so that it's affordable. So if you can only charge a certain amount of rent, we only have 1 or 2 units, and we're restricting the amount of rent to keep up, maintain, and also without subsidizing it, the additional units on one lot kind of offsets that. So if you can put 40 units onto one lot of land and collect 40 of affordable unit rents, you can make it work. But if you only have 1 or 2 and you're only charging $1,500 a month on a property that really needs $3,000 a month, I'm just throwing numbers out, so don't quote those. It makes it difficult. So like if we're doing subsidized housing, does it work? Maybe, but then who's subsidizing the housing there? So I think to a certain limit, if you can't put enough units to generate enough rent revenue to maintain the property, then you end up in a bad situation that we're coming back to this committee or the Common Council or whoever else and trying to get more and more money every year to maintain properties. So there has to be a balance of the units, the affordability of the units, and then what that income can support for the property.
May I ask a follow-up question, Madam Chair?
Oh, please. This is the point of this.
So when I made my suggestion about the tax sale, I did not, maybe I was not clear. I did not mean for those homes or units to be rental units. I know some housing authorities, some other entities have programs that are like rent to own. So yeah, you're renting, but you're renting in the possibility to own that thing. So I just want to be clear. I think those situations with the tax liens would be better. So my understanding, and my very novice understanding, let me say that, is anytime you're in a rent to own type of programming, you have a higher income. You may not be you're mid income, and a lot of times it is my understanding that a lot of those people are not eligible for some of the more lower income units, but they're still not available. They still don't have enough to go outright and buy a unit. So that's what I'm talking about. That middle section of people. not the extremely, I don't even know what the right terminology is, but the people that have stable jobs, good jobs, or whatever, that can afford a rent to own program, but may not have the knowledge, may not have all the things put
The
together,
down payment.
the down payment, whatever, to go to a bank and do a traditional mortgage. I think that those instances, the tax lien would be beneficial. So if you have a one unit or a house, it's okay because the person we're putting in the house, they're working to own that house. Am I making sense? I'm babbling again, y'all.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. And I think
Madam
one
Chair,
of
do you
the
want me
next
to?
items relates to that, to this.
Okay.
You wanna,
Okay.
yeah.
Can I just say the houses that are in the tax liens are people that are financially having difficulty paying their taxes. So most likely they're elderly people or disabled people. And I personally would be opposed to taking somebody's house because they can't pay their taxes or are struggling financially and giving it to somebody else who's struggling. I think we should put more money in helping people be able to stay in their homes.
Heather, you're missing the point. I think you're missing what we're saying, what I'm saying.
Okay.
At some point, the house is either gonna go or gonna come. We all agree we need to figure out a way to help people stay in their homes. But there's a point that it's past return. I'm talking about at that point. I'm talking about at that point when it's past return. What are we doing now? We're getting them, we're selling them, and other people are taking them, flipping them, or doing whatever they're doing with them and making a profit on them. I'm saying let's take that stock pool of houses that maybe will not go at auction. We have houses that don't sell that don't sell at the tax sale. Every year they don't sell. Why aren't we taking those units, those homes, and putting them in a program to help other people? We have abandoned homes in Norwalk. There are homes in Norwalk that are abandoned. What
That's-
are we
that's
as a
a great issue.
municipality doing with those homes?
I think Greg Burnett is on here. He might be the best person to talk to about the finances of the tag sale because he talks to Lisa about it a lot, maybe.
Well, and I think maybe let's not get derailed on that issue. I think this is a larger conversation. And I think maybe Ms. Ayers, talking to Mr. Kleppen about kind of what he has in mind to propose, because I think that there will be some proposal that then will be more specific we can look at. Let's try to keep moving forward, because I know we're just about out of time through the quickly through the housing authority items and the redevelopment items. And I mean, I think one other thing to consider, we may want to make some of these future meetings. I try to be very respectful of people's times, but we may need more than an hour on some of our future meetings. I think we have a lot to talk about. But let's see if we can at least get through our guest speakers, their items, so we at least have some sense of what is already being done and what the priorities are so that we can fold that into our future thinking. So Adam, you want to talk about this rent to own program that already exists, which I found actually very exciting to hear about?
Yeah, so I only have two more items. The first one is on page 5-7, number 9, which is implement a graduated homeownership program where eligible renters can gradually purchase their homes over time, with portions of their rent contributing to their equity in the home. So the Norwalk Housing Authority is one of the few housing authorities in the state, actually, that uses its Section 8 program as a homeownership program for those families that are eligible. It's not a ton of families. I think we have about 15 in it right now. But those families who have a regular housing choice voucher through the housing authority, instead of paying 30% of their income towards their rent and utilities, they can pay 30% of their income towards their mortgage and utilities. So they're in our Section 8 program. If they can qualify for a bank loan with our assistance, because the bank understands that they have this valuable subsidy, and they can find a unit that's under the fair market rent payment standard that we have. They can pay their mortgage. They can try to get it. They can get a loan and a bank loan and get a mortgage, and they can use their Section 8 voucher to pay that mortgage. There are some catches with it because it's a federal program. One of them is that it takes their potentially lifelong voucher and makes it only a 15-year voucher unless the head of household is disabled. So it has to be a family that in 15 years with the equity they have in their home and with the with the voucher they've had over time can become independent, or it can be a disabled family and then they get the subsidy for the 30 years of the loan. So we do have that program. It is utilized. We're one of the few in the state that does it. But the vast majority of our Section 8 tenants won't qualify for a loan or don't want to risk it.
But what I thought was helpful about this in terms of the action item is that it does give us a sort of a base of information and knowledge that we could use to explore. If there's a non-federal version of this that we as the city could consider, are there public-private partnerships? Are there other options? I was just excited to hear that we have some experience in this and that it's something potentially your office could think about what it would cost, what it would look like if we wanted to make a proposal to expand that.
Yeah, it would be fairly easy for us to explain the costs. I can tell you right now that the average voucher, actually, I don't know I'm in the home ownership program, but the average voucher currently subsidizes about $1,500 a month. So your cost would be $1,500 a month for 15 or 30 years per family. That's what it would cost, and it would need to really be, funded appropriately so we don't end up leaving families in the lurch if new mayor comes in or whatever it is, and they decide they no longer like the program. But that's what roughly it costs these days for a voucher.
And I think, again, I think that's very just say part of what I think this committee has found so valuable about this whole study is really actually getting hard data. And that's a really, for instance, very important piece to know. Like, we're talking about a minimum of $1,500 a month per person or per family to do a subsidy. Like, that's helpful for us thinking about what, if we want to propose some new programming, if we want to propose some capital funding, what are we really looking at to evaluate how we can, who we can help and how many people we could do that with. So I appreciate that. And then I think your last item.
Yeah, last item is on page 5-8. It's item A6. Oh, my dog's about to go.
Yep.
My apologies. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Someone is at our door and my dog was a little loud. My apologies. So
No
the
worries.
last item is item A6, which is the housing affordability is a regional crisis, and work with WestCog to further fair housing goals and the creation of affordable housing in adjacent municipalities. And the one thing I would just say about that is, first of all, the Housing Authority does technically have a statutory restriction, and we really only work within Norwalk for now. That is something that can be adjusted, but that's our jurisdiction right now. The other thing is, just to be clear, that we tend to lobby currently the state on their low-income housing tax credit program. We lobby the state to, they've got a point system where they're encouraging right now, you get points in a low-income housing tax credit application for the 9% tax credits if you are in a higher opportunity neighborhood, or if you are in a city that does not meet its 8-30G affordable housing requirements. And we actually are fighting that right now because it may make it nearly impossible for us to develop affordable housing here in Norwalk of a certain size. So we're looking right now at a potential project of as many as 180 units of affordable housing at the train station. To do that, we would need 9% low-income housing tax credits. And if we push for regionalization, if we push our suburban communities to do more, and then the resources from the state go there, that the pie is only so big, and it would be harder for us to build affordable housing here if we want to keep our lower income populations here and able to live here who've been here for generations. So I do think that it would be great if the suburban communities did more. Absolutely. They do need to share more of the burden. But if we're lobbying WestCog that should be a policy, the end result really is, the state then will look to provide the resources to those suburban communities rather than to urban communities like our own.
And that is, I think, the sort of unintended consequence that is very helpful for us to have on our radars as we think about things like that. Because it is, we want both, right? And it is, I think, a trade-off that I don't think I had quite really thought through, that if we are pushing to do more elsewhere, it could actually hurt our ability to help our own residents. So thank you very much, Mr. Bolowski. This was very insightful. I think that we've captured sort of some of your um, both switches in terms of who's responsible, but also sort of insight into how we can make this item more actionable. And Mr. Ivan, can we then very quickly get from you sort of the redevelopment items? I know we talked already about the brownfield study, which is exciting, but do you want to just sort of quickly talk about, I think the items that were assigned to redevelopment, you were pretty comfortable were in your purview. Doesn't necessarily mean you have the capacity at the moment to do them.
Yeah, so I'll be very general here, just in the essence of time. And then if the members have any questions on the specific items, I'm happy to field those or provide, whatever additional information that I can. We do not own a lot of the property. They're either listed on the brownfields or otherwise. So I think with the city's input, we're able and willing to help with any targeted projects. I think if the city identifies a property that they're interested in developing, selling, or otherwise, the good first step is to work that out with Brian as the first contact. We're happy to look for grant opportunities or otherwise to help leverage the sale of the property to acquire additional affordable units if it is being sold, or if there's any other resources that we're able to apply to. We're happy to look into those. The same goes for programming. If there's a program that the city decides that they want to develop, that they don't feel falls under an existing office, or that is more targeted to us, it's the same thing that I'm sure that Brian's happy to have the conversation, looking at the feasibility of various programs and what resources are available for that to help the program out. But I think that it will really be helpful for the city to identify, just in the sense of affordable housing, what it is that you're looking for from us to initiate the conversation so that we know what we need to look into.
And one item that I think, again, I'm sure could be a 3-hour conversation, but has been of real interest to this committee already, is the 10% of workforce housing, and the sort of calculus as to why it is that that we are sort of capping our expectations of developers at 10% of, a large scale apartment project, having only sort of 10% at the workforce level. And can you talk a little bit about how redevelopment sort of assesses what is sustainable to expect from developers? Why 10% is kind of where you're at, what it would look like if we wanted to push that to 12 or 15 or 20. And again, recognizing this is a very huge topic, could you just give us a little bit of a sense of kind of how you think about that, and maybe whether it's worth us having a longer conversation to really get into the weeds on?
So that is outside of my area of expertise. So I'll either need to defer to having Brian put an email together, or if Steve Kleppen, you want to jump in a little bit. I think ultimately it comes down to money. What is the developer willing to give up, or what can we offer to incentivize the developer, either through regulation or what we're able to provide through grants to sweeten the deal a little bit and get a higher percentage of affordable housing. My general take is that it would come down to money and what they're willing to put there to make their numbers work.
Okay, and I do recognize it's 7-Eleven, so maybe this is a question we should invite Brian back to talk in more depth with Brian and Steve to really get into with the committee.
Yeah, I can, let me run the question through Brian and ask him to send you a more detailed response, just so that I'm not misspeaking or confusing anybody. I think that would probably be best.
Other committee members have questions on redevelopment or any of the redevelopment items on the action plan at the moment? Okay. Thank you both very much. I really appreciate your contributions to this. I appreciate your willingness. We are going to be, as you've seen, tracking the items. There will probably be some follow-up on some of these things. Our goal really is to sort of keep showing progress each month on at least on the low-hanging fruit and what we can keep doing. So we will we will likely be reaching out further. But I think this is really helpful as a place to start. Um, uh, so maybe before we quickly wrap up for the evening, I don't know if we're gonna get into the affordable housing account discussion. Can we at least, however, get an update, maybe Steve and Michelle, on the 80% issue? Because I know that we had promised the committee that you all would be able to give an update on that item this month.
Sure, I can do it as quickly as you'd like. So just a quick update. Last night, Planning and Zoning Commission actually passed the first kind of amendment that came out of the workforce housing plan, excuse me, the affordable housing plan. You recall that one of the areas identified in the plan as a need was that number of 2-bedroom units that they found that, that seems like that was there wasn't enough of that, and that was an issue throughout the market. So we put in an amendment last night that was passed that allows, if someone develops a 2-bedroom unit, that the 2-bedroom unit actually counts as 1.5 workforce units. So say they build 4 2-bedroom units and they designate 2 of those as workforce units, that counts towards 3 workforce units for them. So it's a little bit of an incentive for them to go ahead and build more 2-bedroom units. So kind of back to the initial question.
That's, yeah, thank you for the update on that.
So the issue that had arisen before was when somebody's comes in and they're eligible for a workforce unit, but during the time that they applied and were approved, and then over the next year when they needed to recertify, they got a raise, they came into some money, whatever the circumstances are. So technically they might no longer qualify for that workforce unit when they hit that 80% of the state median income. So what we did was we put together some text which basically says if you get above that 80% threshold, but you're less than 90% of SMI, then you can still remain within that workforce unit. The caveat, which is something that I'm going to have a more in-depth conversation with the Planning and Zoning Commission on, is that unit won't count towards our 10% maximum anymore. Just because the state's criteria is that 80%, and then we'll be at whatever we're at, 85% for that unit. So what I did was, as a clause, I put in there those units are eligible provided that the city has at least 12% of their housing units meet that affordability criteria. The limit's 10 for the state. We're at like 13.5. So I figured 12% was probably a good cushion. Michelle's actually working on running some numbers just to see how many people on an annual basis are kind of at that 80 to 90% level, just to make sure that those numbers don't skew too far from what we anticipate. And we're also looking at another one, actually 2, but one's a little more advanced, that we're trying to put in a bonus provision where we're going to allow somebody to get an extra 5% above the maximum density if they designate those units between 80 and 90% SMI. So say you're allowed to build 60 units on a property, we allow you to do an extra 5% above that, provided that you keep those units deed restricted at between 80 and 90%. So they'd still have to comply with the existing workforce provisions, but we're going to give you a little bonus, but those units are going to be further restricted. And then I'm just started working on trying to come up with some broader bonus provisions to get at some more deeply affordable units, but I just started on that.
Thank you, but that's, I think, very helpful. I see Ms. Young has a question. Nope, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Steve, how long do our deed restrictions usually go for? How many years?
Oh, ours are in perpetuity.
Okay.
And
Are they all in perpetuity?
Yeah, when the first workforce units were put in place by the city, they weren't in perpetuity, but 90-something% of the units in our program are all in perpetuity.
Thank you.
okay. Thank you for those updates, and I really appreciate you, again, moving forward on items that were identified in the plan as sort of low-hanging fruit. I think is really good for the city to kind of grapple with these. Ms. Edie.
Hi, thanks, Miss Nora. Steve and Michelle, can you just help me just like do the math like real quick, right? So you say between 80 and 90%. So say you get 10% raise. Are you saying that cap for one bedroom, you can add 10% of your income to that and that would raise the cap? Is that how we're going to figure that out?
And Michelle, bail me out if I don't make any sense, but if you're based on the family size, all the incomes are all based off family size. So it's like a family of 4, family of 2, family of 1, whatever that may be. If you're at, or if you're below that 80%, then you qualify for a workforce unit. If you get a raise and that pushes you to 85% of the median income, you'd still be allowed to stay in the unit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, so now, okay, 68,000, right, is the cap. So now are you saying 5%? If I go over 5%, you're still eligible. Do you add it on to the cap? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Is the cap getting raised?
Yeah, so I don't know if I would say the cap is getting raised, but your pay can increase where you'd be above that 80% threshold. And keep in mind that SMI number, even though it's lower than the area median income for where we live, that SMI number goes up every year.
It does. It doesn't go up by much, but it does. So yeah, I'm just trying to figure that out. I'm just still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you offline, Nicole.
That's fine.
Yeah, look at that spreadsheet that we have.
Yeah, I was going to say, Michelle, maybe email out the spreadsheet because that actually has all the 100%, 80%, 60%. So it's got all those numbers in there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful for people to see. But again, I do really appreciate this idea of, again, the goal is to create stability. This allows people, the whole idea is you create stability that allows people to advance in their careers. You don't then want to immediately pull the rug out from under them. So I think that makes a lot of sense as a proposal. And this is something that I believe will go through planning and zoning, correct? This is not something the council has actual authority over.
Yeah, it'll go through and I mean, there'll be a public hearing. So anybody is, welcome to come in and comment on that. I think that'll probably happen by May at the latest.
Right. So on the Affordable Housing Account Act, I really don't want to keep delaying. But I also think that we don't yet have a sufficient number of recommendations for the committee, so we also can't really move it forward this month anyway. So what I'm going to ask for the committee members is to please consider further recommendations for that committee membership and take a look at the information that was circulated. And in fact, Michelle, we can follow up on that so that we can have a meeting at our next meeting, or I may request, would people object to our next meeting be a little bit longer? Because we're going to have a speaker next meeting talking about tax credits and how you can use tax credits to help incentivize the kind of housing you want to see. So can we, or would folks be okay if our meeting next time is an hour and a half so that we can do that speaker and then also talk about the affordable housing account? Am I seeing nods? Okay. All right. So we will do that. So we will plan then on hopefully being able to really move the housing account forward then next month after we have our discussion with our speaker. The other thing, last thing to say on that is date wise. That meeting is during spring break. I will follow up with Michelle on that and see if we can move it, if there is another available night. As everyone knows, the nights get so booked. So we'll see what we can do on that if possible. And if not, we may just all have to, it's recorded so the public can see it even if they're on spring break. Thank you very much to everyone. I appreciate your patience. I know we really ran over. Any last comments or thoughts before we wind up for the evening? Ms. Young?
Chair, I just want to thank you. This was a very informative session, and I don't recall having conversations like this about housing this in depth. And so I appreciate you putting all this together. I appreciate Adam speaking and all that Stephen has been doing, and Michelle and others, and Steve and Ivan from the redevelopment agency. So thank you very much. This was a very good conversation.
I'm so glad. I have learned so
it's about
much.
education. I think this is about educating ourselves along with the public, and we hope that they, tune in. If they've got any questions, that they can go back to these meetings that we've been having so far. A lot more to do.
A lot more to do, but I'm so glad to hear that because I have to say, like, I have learned so much. I will admit, I'm embarrassed to say that I did not realize that we had stopped our capital funding for the housing authority. I genuinely don't know.
I didn't know that either. Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's something I should have known. And so I think this is all really helping us figure out kind of what our next steps and recommendations are. And I'm very grateful, Michelle. I feel like you've really put in yeoman's work already on this and getting this all sort of organized and kind of keeping us accountable. But I look forward to sort of getting educated together and then figuring out what we want to do with all this information. So thank you all very much. I would take a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ms. Ayers. All right. All in favor? All right. Thank you all very much.
Night.
Good night.
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 Thank you, everybody.